continuing our study on systemic race. Are we having problems hearing? Are we having problems hearing, Mr. Clerk? Does this mean we're ready to go?
We're good to start.
Going up. Okay, good. Thank you. This is the 7th meeting of the Public Safety Committee. We are continuing our study on systemic racism. I point out, colleagues, that we are about 40 minutes late starting, and one of our witnesses had to leave, and she has agreed to come into the second panel, and Mr. Paul has graciously agreed to come up into the first panel. So our first panel is Mr. John Paul from Atlantic Policy Congress, the First Nation Chief Secretariat, and along with him is the National Association of Friendship Centers, Christopher Shepard and Jocelyn Formza. Now, colleagues, I'm going to be a little bit arbitrary here in order to be able to speed things up, and I'm going to basically chop a minute off all of the speaking times, both for the witnesses and the questions, and maybe we can make up a bit of the time that we're behind. But this voting stuff is really cutting into the committee's time these days. So with that, I'm going to call Mr. Paul to be the first person giving testimony. And Mr. Paul, just to sort of make it a bit easier, if from time to time you could look up at the chair, and I'll try to signal you when you're 2 minutes and 1 minute. And I know that we initially said we'd give you 7 minutes, but with the time constraints that we're under, if you could confine your remarks to 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Paul.
Okay, I'll go as fast as I can to cover everything. I just want to say thank you for letting me come and present today some views about this very important topic. The executive director of our organization, a nonprofit which represents 33 communities across Atlantic Canada and the Gaspé in Quebec. Our organization is an advocacy policy research organization which analyzes and develops culturally relevant alternatives to federal policies that impact Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, and Innu communities and peoples. I have worked for Indigenous communities over 35 years and had various relationships and dealings with the police over my career. Racism and the continued existence of racist behaviors or actions or incidents involving police continues to concern our Indigenous leadership. The issue must be addressed directly by governments as well as all key stakeholders, and highlights a need for a formal long-term strategy to help ensure any and all racist behaviors or actions are addressed and appropriate actions are taken to allow transformation and implementation of real changes needed to empower and support Indigenous people. Racism, in many cases, has been institutionalized into a range of very traditional institutions and is not obvious or apparent to those involved in institutions. Whether the policing structure is local, provincial, or national, the mere raising of racism creates negative or hostile response from some people, and they believe it's a personal attack on them as individual. Remember always, racism is a learned behavior which may not be obvious or apparent to the individual and may be invisible to some because of personal bias or set attitudes or values people have. Many Indigenous people across Canada and Atlantic have great respect for the police, which they have developed over many decades, which has developed on an individual basis. Indigenous people inside and outside policing structures, and those Indigenous people deal with and through the establishment of long-term relationships builds trust and demonstrated commitments and actions. Such trust is eroded for whatever reason, so is the relationship, and this takes a very long time to rebuild or reestablish, or not at all. Since the start of Canada post-Confederation in 1867 and before, police have played a significant role in the relationship with Indigenous groups and people. People have played a significant role in the implementation of colonial-based policies focused on assimilation and implementation of some bad things. The terrible foundation planted and the root causes of racism, apparent and real how policing has been carried out and is carried out today. Today, the focus of racism in the police, I believe, will help critical issues and concerns and develop some concrete strategies for change and demonstrate improvements and results. Perception of a problem like racism and whether it exists or does not is an important consideration. Change will not be easy and must be supported by all parties, including cross governments and the police at all levels, as well as all the impacted stakeholders. Racism behavior brings out the worst in people, and any of those practice racist behaviors should and must be accountable for their actions. Most recently, these behaviors were clearly demonstrated by non-Indigenous fishers in Nova Scotia on the recent conflict involving the implementation of treaty rights and the moderate livelihood fishery. The delays in timing for RCMP to take the necessary actions and follow-up have raised many concerns with our leadership and our communities. The feeling of concern was also expressed by many of the general public, and the actions of police were not adequate, and the action took some time. It is important to learn critical lessons from these incidents, and must and should be avoided at all costs, and help build credibility and trust of the police and the community they serve. My experiences with the police started a very long time ago with the wrongful conviction of Donald Marshall Jr. in my home community, Member 2, and subsequent Royal Commission on the wrongful conviction Donald Marshall Jr. and a recommendation detailed some fundamental changes needed in the justice system and raised considerable concerns about the city police. The legacy and impact of these events made me and many other people from my community and other communities also pay attention to what policing was doing and services provided to our communities. Over the years, changes to the type, delivery, as well as models and approaches of policing services to communities have changed and evolved. They're either municipal, RCMP, tribal police forces, and municipal police forces, and each of them have different issues and concerns. The reality in the past is always where concerns of Indigenous people identified, addressed, and necessary changes were made in a lot of cases that helped improve the relationship and address things to build a strong relationship over time. Fundamentally, to help ensure the elimination, the design and delivery of policing services must be done in full partnership with Indigenous leadership and
so, Mr. Paul, could you get the rest of your marks in the question and answer session again? I apologize for
no, that's fine.
Rushing you through this, but sorry.
That's fine.
We have from the National Association of Friendship Centers, President Shepard and Jocelyn Formosa, Executive Directors. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. The comments will be made by President Shepard, and I'll be here for Q&A.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Christopher Shepard. I'm the president of the National Association of Friendship Centers. And I want to recognize that I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 in the homeland of the Métis, where I have received an incredible welcome since moving. I'm joined by our Executive Director, Jocelyn Formsma, and we thank you today for your invitation to be here and appear before you and the members of the committee today. The NAFC represents over 100 local friendship centers and provincial and territorial associations in every province and territory in Canada, except for Prince Edward Island. Friendship centers are an urban Indigenous community hub that provides a wide range of programs and services for every demographic of Indigenous people. Collectively, we are the largest and most comprehensive urban Indigenous service delivery network in Canada. In 2019, 93 friendship centers served approximately 1.4 million First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and non-Indigenous people across over 1,200 programs in 238 buildings and employing over 2,700 staff. We are proud to be a largely Indigenous women's-led network. With respect to why we're here today, justice programs in 2016-17 amounted to 72 friendship centers offering 93 programs with 28 considered restorative justice. Friendship centers often interact with local and regional police services and other law enforcement agencies. This committee has already heard testimony regarding specific examples of systemic, sorry, my document just got lost, about numerous reports compiling evidence and experience over long periods of time. We have also had many examples from our own experiences and what we have heard from communities we serve. In the interest of time, we want to focus on actions to take from here. The NAFC conducted a literature review of reports and the recommendations that they make regarding Indigenous justice. From this review, we gathered themes from the recommendations that have been emphasized and repeated in multiple reports. We have reviewed federal government strategies, programs, or other federal responses to these reports. From those reports, there were 3 common recommendations. 1, training and educating non-Indigenous people of Indigenous history, heritage, culture, identity, rights, laws, and current realities. However, in our review of publicly available federal responses, we found little in the way of mandatory or ongoing training on Indigenous matters for any national or federal law enforcement entity. The second theme is increased funding to Indigenous communities, as well as to public programs and organizations whose objective is to benefit Indigenous people. We have already outlined some of the programs that friendship centers operate. The funds for these programs largely come from municipalities or provinces. The third theme is increased participation of elders within the justice system, provide education and training of the Canadian justice system to Indigenous people, and increasing and promoting proper use of Gladue reports and courts. Again, these activities are very sparsely implemented across the country. Urban Indigenous people are continually caught in jurisdictional matters between federal and provincial governments. Law enforcement is no different. For the recommendations to be successfully interpreted and implemented, funding must be provided to Indigenous people living in urban communities, as well as in rural or remote communities, on an equitable basis. The funding cannot just be a one-time payment or a short-term proposal response to what is a generational issue. Rather, it must be sustainable so that the programs and organizations concerned can be maintained and serve the community in the long term. It is important to note that these reports were commissioned and published by the federal government of Canada, provincial governments, intergovernmental organizations, and independent organizations. The reports above span a time of roughly 50 years. This means that 50 years of missed opportunity to make committed, core, long-lasting change. This lapse in times has led us to 2 overarching recommendations: co-developing accountability mechanisms for implementing the recommendations in the reports named above, and developing structures to have honest conversations about what can be done and what is being done. The NAFC submits that an additional crucial step in ensuring accountability is to legislate the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a way that the rights of Indigenous individuals are upheld and the transportability of rights and urban Indigenous peoples are not left out of a distinctions-based approach, which is what we see today. The NAFC has offered and continues to offer its perspectives, expertise, and knowledge of urban Indigenous communities and community members to inform the federal government and guide effective remedies both now and as we continue this journey. We look forward to being a part of the ongoing conversation and to the continued investment in our work. And I really anticipate some really good questions for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, President Shepherd, for being within 3 seconds of your time. That's good. And one of the things this committee is known for is the excellent questions, which will be led off by Mr. Kirk, who has 5 minutes, Mr. Yakino, another 5 minutes, Madam Michaud, and Mr. Harris, 5 minutes each. So, Mr. Kirk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And first, let me start by thanking the witnesses for coming and for being flexible. I know in these challenging times, your flexibility is very, very much appreciated. Mr. Paul, in light of the fact that I have a few questions on the situation in Atlantic Canada regarding fisheries. So if you would like to take a minute or two of my initial questioning time to wrap up your remarks, you may answer a couple of my questions. So if you'd like to do that, certainly I'd be happy to accommodate.
Well, I guess the only big thing is that one of the probably most critical things is including us Indigenous people in the actual design of how you actually do policing and how it gets delivered. Because if we're not part of the design and then part of the governance of the delivery of it, then you don't actually have a say in what the results or outcomes. The other one is the need for civilian oversight and a really critical way to conduct evaluation of these activities in a way that they demonstrate the actual results that that are what actually is coming out of policing that promotes fundamental change or improvement in Indigenous communities. You know, you can keep track of numbers, but it's really how is that contribution to the reduction of racism, and number two, how is it contributing to safe resolutions of very difficult issues that face people in our communities. And you know, our people on and off reserve live in poverty, live with poor health, and are also all the time end up being the ones that have interactions with the police for whatever reason. And it the majority of those cases don't end up with a positive outcome. We need to really figure out a way to produce outcomes from interactions with police that actually produce a good thing. And you know, it was apparent when we did have an Indigenous policing regime that the Indigenous police officers and the governance of the policing really did care about the community and went out of their way to enforce the laws, but also work towards the betterment and improvement of the community and the people. So those are things that are critical in terms of any go forward strategy that gets developed.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad you had a chance to finish your remarks. Now, the minister has promised to bring forward new legislation to make First Nations policing an essential service and a larger part of policing options across our country. I'm just curious, has anyone reached out to you to address the issues that a lot of your research has been focused on addressing?
I've spoken to some of the officials in the minister's office and explained the tragedy that occurred in terms of implementing Indigenous policing in the past and how it was set up to fail, basically, and through chronic underfunding and lack of oversight, civilian oversight, and a lack of measurable evaluative outcomes. You know, it was a pilot destined to fail, basically, and if it does require it to be designated as an essential service, they must have the financial resources, the governance, and the inclusiveness to make it a real success. And unless those things are built into what is an essential services, I worry that it'll be doomed to the same fate as past strategies of policing.
Unfortunately, Mr. Kirk, we're going to have to leave it there. With that, Mr. Yakino, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Welcome. As Director of the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chief Secretariat, can you tell us what are the main demands and recommendations of First Nation chiefs on the East Coast towards the federal government?
And here in an English translation of that, is there a way to?
Are we having a problem?
I'm not sure if. Is there a way?
At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little globe.
Yep.
And if you press that globe, it says English or French.
Okay.
If you press English,
yep, I did that.
Okay. So let's do a restart with Mr. Yakino.
Do it quickly.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Let's ask the question again.
Okay. Très bien, Monsieur Paul.
Mr. Paul, can you hear me now? As Director of the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chief Secretariat, can you tell us what are the main requests and recommendations from First Nations chiefs on the East Coast towards the federal government?
It's making sure that if it is set up as an essential service, that there is Indigenous oversight of whatever gets developed, and it's co-designed. That the essential policing service is co-designed, and a mutual evaluation framework is developed in advance of whatever gets created to ensure it does produce the kind of outcomes and success that are available. The other issue is adequacy of resources and training and inclusion of Indigenous culture and language in the delivery of policing services, because it is essential in terms of dealing with communities and dealing with the realities of Indigenous people. And to be effective, people providing policing services need to understand that reality to be effective and provide those types of outcomes which make sense when you have a policing service.
Mr. Paul, you mentioned earlier that design and delivery are important factors. You also mentioned the civilian oversight, and you also mentioned that it's designed to fail. Can you be a little more clear on what are three major aspects, three major pointers that we should be focusing on to assure ourselves that it's not going to be designed to fail?
Proper training, proper certification of staff, proper governance regime led by Indigenous people in partnership with governments, basically, because it requires that collective collaboration to find areas of focus that would improve policing and improve the outcomes relative to policing, basically.
I have one last question. And who should be the parties involved in assuring that this gets done well?
I think all the parties can be involved. The issue in the past is that either the federal or provincial government dictated the how it was going to be played. Unless we're equal partners in this, the outcome will never be a success. That's a real concern I have, because if you control the way it's going to be designed and delivered, and we're not part of it, then the outcome won't work for those communities.
What do you mean by the civilian oversight? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Police not providing oversight to police.
That's very interesting.
Yes, I know.
Can you clarify that point, please?
Well, I think there's enough educated people, that Indigenous people in the country, that could provide insights to people providing policing services that are not the same as the rigid training that police are accustomed to, and at least would allow more flexibility in terms of how things actually get implemented on the ground.
That means you would suggest a body who
Yes.
would be monitoring the police who's not policing the police.
Yes.
Interesting. No further questions,
Okay.
President.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, would I be able to respond to that question if there's time?
Absolutely. Yes, there is. About 45 seconds. Go for it.
Thank you. I will try to be within that 45 seconds. Just in the report that we had mentioned, we had looked at a number of reports that made specific recommendations in policing. And so for the last 50 years, recommendations around training have been made. The issue hasn't been the training, the issue has been the implementation and the accountability. So that's really the piece that I would certainly support what Mr. Paul is recommending. That the accountability piece and the enforcement, if you will, of those recommendations for law enforcement is the real issue that we need to address collectively. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yacono. Madame Michaud, 5 minutes.
Ms. Michaud, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. And thank you to all of the witnesses. First, I would like to make sure that Mr. Shepherd can hear the interpretation, because I will be asking him a question. Yes, great. You were saying that your organization often deals with police corps, regionally or local corps, and that you've witnessed systemic racism in the past. Could you give us a few examples of incidents that happened? And according to you, what should the federal government do in order to make sure that those incidents do not happen again in communities?
I can give a couple of examples, actually, because I'm an Indigenous person who lives in Canada and have had interactions with the police. But I also was an executive director of a large friendship center that worked within actual women's prison, within a youth correctional center. We supported the young people and women who were interacting with those spaces. We also had tried to work with the local city police around our experiences and our community members' experiences, but also in Saskatchewan, since I've been here, our work in anti-racism across a latitude of different areas. I've had personal experiences where the police were more worried about whether I was intoxicated after a car accident and the fact that my leg was broken. With my work in an organization, watching an Indigenous person being removed from a police vehicle and put on the snowbank outside of my friendship center in a blizzard because they thought it was, I guess, a nice place to drop someone in the middle of the winter. We've seen so many examples, whether it's an individualized or not, that it becomes incredibly important for us to remind people that we have talked about it for a long time. We have recommended things for a long time. The number of times we've recommended people implementing the Royal Commission recommendations 30 years ago, it's, I think, important to recognize that on top of those recommendations and behind those recommendations are individuals that have experienced intense systemic racism from a structure that was designed and used to enforce colonization throughout our history. And I've always tried to maintain hope that at some point we'll read recommendations and actually do them. But it comes increasingly challenging when you have things like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has entire sections on training and education. I've talked to university presidents that said, you know, in 3 generations, you could retrain every mind in every sector, but you don't. And so, you know, I just want to remind people that behind mine and other people's experiences are these reports, and we've added to them and spoke to them and tried really hard to see their implementation. But we have yet to see it. And we still remain optimistic and hopeful to be a partner. But this is lived experience of our people across the country every day in systems with so much power.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you for this. It's quite moving to listen to you because we know what's going on, but no one is talking about it. And so thank you for sharing your experience. And as you said, the colonial past is still present. And in your opening remarks, you said that it was important to teach your culture, your history, and I totally agree with you. It should be done. According to you, in what shape could it be done? Should we train police people? Should we invest more in training police officers?
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. That's an important question. Possibly you could work it back into another answer. So with that, unfortunately, Mr. Harris, it's not unfortunate that we're having Mr. Harris, but you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to have these witnesses here today, and I'm also was quite moved by the last presentation, but also let me say that I get a sense of hope from all 3 of you that this is something that can be fixed, that there are things that actually can be done to change the experience of interactions with the police by Indigenous people, in the case of your people you represent. And if that's wrong, tell me, but I am hearing signs of expectation that we may be able to make some recommendations that are useful. Let me start by asking Mr. Paul, your organization sent a letter to the Minister of Fisheries along with a copy to the Mr. Mark Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services, and Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, as well as all Atlantic MPs back in September 22nd, in which you talk about the moderate livelihood dispute and mention that I'll read 2 parts of 2 sentences. One of your communities is working to undertake a moderate livelihood fishery, quote, under a cloud of racism and threats of violence to people, property, damage, and the destruction of traps and gear. And then there's another sentence, and then, quote, violence and conflict are not a solution, and racism with the policy status quo is not a realistic path to a lasting solution. That was about almost a month before the situation that we've all seen on TV erupt in the destruction of traps and threats of violence and violence. What was that? Was this intended to be a warning of any kind, or was that just a statement of fact?
It was a warning because it came from a context that in 1999 I was actually involved in the fishery post-Marshall, and I was subject to a lot of racism and a lot of criticism by fishery organizations and groups across Atlantic Canada that didn't want to believe that that our right existed, and we were under siege every day to deal with the violence. And at that time, one of the critical elements was we told the fisher groups that the only way we'll come to peace is at the wharves. And I still believe that applies today. And, unless we can make peace at the wharves, it's hard to avoid conflict or violence when people believe you shouldn't be there.
Would that condition of violence and threats, would that have been known to the authorities and the police forces and
Yes.
those responsible? They would have been aware of that, you're saying?
Yes. They should have been. They like the issue is those police live there, live in that area. They know the people that were the people that actually exercised a lot of these activities, and they you 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 live there. You usually understand the dynamics of a community that is around you.
But we've been told by authorities, by the commissioner, by the minister that they responded appropriately, and it's a provincial responsibility, etc. What do you say to that?
Well, the issue with that is that the priorities of police in Nova Scotia are set by the provincial government, not by us.
Tell me, there's a lot to talk about because we've taken on a big topic. You mentioned the pilot project in Indigenous policing, perhaps tribal policing. Was that in a particular community, Mr. Paul?
It included
Very briefly, please.
It included 5 communities in Cape Breton. It was called Unamagi Policing at the time, and it basically hired Indigenous police trained at the RCMP standard to provide policing services to 5 communities in Cape Breton.
Can it
Thank
work?
you, Mr. Harris.
Yes, it can.
Unfortunately. Mr. Van Popta, 4 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us this evening and sharing your wisdom and experiences with us. It's very informative. Mr. Paul, I'm very intrigued by your comments around lobster fishing and the Marshall decision. The Marshall decision is about 20 years ago. Have you, other than the incident of racism that we saw recently, has there been improvement in Indigenous Crown relations since the Marshall decision, in your opinion?
I think, everybody's talking, but it's not producing outcomes, basically, and that's always an issue. If there are no outcomes or solutions coming out of negotiations or dialogue for 20 years, there's got to be something wrong with the process.
Right. So the Supreme Court of Canada in the Marshall decision didn't actually define what a moderate livelihood is, leaving it up to the parties to negotiate that. So fill me in here. Has there been negotiations going on between Indigenous peoples and the Crown since the Marshall decision as to what a moderate livelihood actually means?
Yes, but it hasn't. It's a circular discussion where some believe it's one thing and others believe it's another thing. And the discussions have been going on for 2 decades.
And there's just not the political will to actually push it over the finish line? Is that what you're telling us?
I haven't participated in any of those negotiations, so I don't know. But I think that it is really important to demonstrate progress. And in the fishery, it's about relationship, safety, and economic success.
Fair enough. Mr. Chair, if I have a couple of minutes yet, I'll put a question to Mr. Shepherd. And that is to do with the First Nations Policing Act, something that we're talking about. What things should this committee keep in mind when we're talking about First Nations Policing Act? What would be some key elements to its success?
Quickly, I'll probably then pass it over to Jocelyn, but 61% of all Indigenous people don't live on reserve. So if you're going to implement an act, it should probably make sure that it talks to the majority of Indigenous people, also to Inuit, Unigat, and Métis folks. And I'll pass over to Jocelyn.
About a minute.
That's the biggest thing, is that for First Nations Policing Act, it's not going to really fall to a majority of the Indigenous population. I am from Anishinaabe Nation. We've had Anishinaabe Nation police services for a number of years, and I think it's a fantastic model. Not without its challenges, for sure, especially in the beginning, but it's certainly been a big, I think, a change maker in our communities by having a police service that's owned and operated by our own. And I would just say, how do we bring some of those elements within the urban space as well? Because a lot of our people are being policed by municipal and provincial, as well as the RCMP police forces. So if we're trying to get at all Indigenous people, we're going to have a variety of responses. And so that's certainly probably one that we're not best to speak to, but we'll definitely look to how do we ensure that some of those elements are brought into the urban spaces as well. And I think that includes restorative justice initiatives and alternative justice initiatives, focusing a lot on the prevention piece.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. Madame Demoff, 4 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all our witnesses for being here this afternoon. Mr. Paul, you talked about Indigenous oversight for policing. I'm assuming that you're talking about First Nations policing. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, so I guess there's a few things. In Ontario, Six Nations has their own police service, but their complaints go to the Ontario SIU, the Special Investigation Unit. For the RCMP, as you know, it goes to the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, and that's a whole conversation that maybe we'll have time for. I don't know. First Nations policing is going to be unique depending on the community. At least I'm hoping that's the direction we're going to. So what works in Six Nations and Anishinaabe Nation may not work in Atlantic Canada. Right. So we need to ensure that each community can have the police service that they would like to see. How do you see this Indigenous oversight working? Because I agree with you. I was actually quite shocked that the Ontario SIU police were investigating Six Nations police, but that's the system that's set up.
I just think that Indigenous oversight would improve the quality of policing fundamentally, because I believe it will build in the element of training and expertise and capacity that will produce better outcomes for a policing service. And I think that the other thing is, because of the rigidity of certain training of RCMP or municipal police forces, the rigidity doesn't allow them to fully appreciate and understand Indigenous ways of doing things. And until they're actually taught how to understand and how to deal with people in that context, the outcomes will be a lot better in terms of dealing with Indigenous people, both on and off reserve. It's a simple thing. Like, even somebody somebody responding in your own language is a very simple thing for police to do. And
Do you think contract policing is working in Atlantic Canada? I mean, you acknowledge that the issues with the fisheries, the RCMP, while they're a federal police service, they report to the province. Do you think that model is working in Atlantic Canada?
no,
Okay.
it does not work.
So I only have a minute left, and I want to ask the friendship centers. We had Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer testify about a model of policing that the Native Family and Child Services are working on for urban Indigenous. I'm wondering if you're familiar with any other models, and if we run out of time, perhaps you could send them to the committee so we could use them for evidence.
Certainly, and that's actually one of the things that we had to cut out of our opening statements is sort of the examples of the types of programs that Friendship Center operate within the justice sphere, including a lot of liaison between police services and community members. Obviously, a lot of prevention work, ongoing support. I think
Could you send the committee the list or
Yes.
some information on that
We
so that
definitely
the
can.
analyst has that? Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to address your complaints mechanisms. I think they're very largely inaccessible, especially even within the urban spaces. If you think about the people that are experiencing, say, police violence or state and enforced violence, they're very vulnerable people and a lot of times have been very dehumanized. And so if there's a lot of trust factors that go into do they feel that the process that they're engaging with is going to result in the have the result that they desire. So I think that even the complaints mechanisms that are existing are probably very inaccessible and very troubling. And I think that's a place where organizations like Friendship Centers can assist in helping to guide and monitor through those processes.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Madame Michaud, une minute, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to invite the witness to respond to the previous question. So the educational system for police officers, and so I would invite him just to respond to my previous question.
This is probably one of the most challenging spaces because of jurisdiction. If we truly want to deal with training, then we need to start dealing with teaching real history in Canada, dealing with the K-12 system and others in this country. When you have countless commissions that tell you that Canadians do not know Indigenous history or facts about our people, what have they experienced? And then you combine that with professional education in your field like policing, you need to restructure a person's learning from way before they get training in police services, for example.
Thank you. I apologize again. I can't say I take any great joy in interrupting people, and especially when they're saying important things. Mr. Harris, your final minute, please.
Thank you. I'll give that minute to the Native Friendship Center group. In terms of urban policing, is there a role for integrated Indigenous people in policing or some separate force? Is that important thing that we should look into?
I'm going to throw this one to Jocelyn so she can also add to the previous piece.
Yes, I will do my best to be concise in this. The systemic and institutional racism in policing, there are two things that I think we really need to reinstate or instate in general is the integrity and the trust from the Indigenous community members. And that's a responsibility on the police agencies. We've got a lot of talk around defunding the police. And for us, I think that means around front-ending resources, the prevention, housing, human connection, healthcare, mental health services, interventions by people who are equipped to handle without violence, community supports, especially around addictions and mental health. I'm sure a lot of police officers will tell you that a lot of their arrests have to do with people who are breaching probation and have addictions and mental health issues. And so why are we arresting and incarcerating people who need help as opposed to, are truly committing a crime? The arrests around...
And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I apologize once again. Seems to me that's the main thing I do. I want, on behalf of the committee, thank Mr. Paul, particularly for his flexibility in moving up, and also President Shepard and Jocelyn Formosa for their contribution. As you can see, the committee is very engaged and very interested in what you have to say. If there is an opportunity to complete any of your remarks that you feel you could submit in writing, please feel free to submit it to the committee. Colleagues, we've gone from 40 minutes late to 30 minutes late. I'm going to suspend, unless I hear, and then we'll re-panel. Colleagues, my anticipation is that we can go to 6:30. Is that an appropriate thing to do? I'm looking at Mr. Clerk. Is that a possibility?
We'll have to see if the technical team is okay with that.
Okay. Well, we'll get started. We can reasonably anticipate an hour, though.
Yeah, we can do an hour for sure.
Okay. Okay. With that, meeting is suspended, and we'll re-panel as soon as our witnesses are assembled. Thank you. an individual, and we're giving each witness 6 minutes, and then to be followed by Mr. Niemi, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Research Action on Race Relations. So with that, Madame Odette, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît. You'll have to take your mic off mute. You're on mute. There, no. There you are. You're off mute. Yep, excellent. Okay.
Your technician is muting, unmuting, and muting. So
Yes.
sorry, sorry about that.
And hello, everybody. I'm going to speak in French. I will be here with my daughter, who is Innu. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. And my words, my emotions, my thoughts will be inspired by the emotions of the women's families, people who have presented testimony to the inquiry across this country, and this has taught us a great deal. And I think that I would like to say that we heard very much testimony about and I think it's very important to discuss this issue of police with regard to women, Indigenous women. And I'm going to start with an example from a woman who said that I hope there will be immediate changes with regard to relations between police and Indigenous peoples on the reserves and elsewhere, especially with regard to investigating disappearances of women and outside reserves. There are conflicts between police who are responsible for reserves and off the reserves, and we want to share this information with everyone who might be able to help them. I think that we have to look after our people, and in the relations with police and the fact that many are living in cities, we have heard much testimony from many women, but we want to do everything we can to protect the well-being of Indigenous women. And unfortunately, there are still poor relations everywhere across Canada. We have heard many reports and we've heard reports from across Canada, and we want to underscore the recommendations, the calls to justice and to action that we developed. And it's shown that there are certainly gaps, inadequacies, and Quebec, for example, has its provincial police, and like in Ontario, there are a great many Indigenous peoples who are policed by the provincial forces, and this is very important for improving relations between Indigenous women and the police. And another problem is the divided responsibilities between the federal government, the provinces, municipalities, and how can we improve the situation? And I think that Ms. Odette.
Can you wind up your remarks?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you're past.
Well, it was 7, it was 8 now.
But it is said to be 8. It was 7, then 8. I think it's very important to find adequate responses to the situation of Indigenous women and men and their relations with the police in Quebec and elsewhere in Ontario, and in order to ensure that we have appropriate training and real assuming of responsibilities.
Again, I apologize for interrupting, but we are way behind where we should be. And with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Nyemi for his 5 minutes. It's helpful if you just look up at the screen from time to time, and I'll try to warn you as to when your time is up. So, Mr. Nyemi, 5 minutes, please. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. This is the great learning of 2020 is how to run the mute machine.
Yes, precisely, yes. Catching up with technology. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, mesdames, messieurs les députés. Je vais faire ma...
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in both languages because we're in Quebec and in Canada where we are bilingual.
Based in Montreal, that we deal with race relations since the mid-80s. And one of the areas we're focusing is police-community relations, particularly police-race relations. I'm very, very honored to be asked to participate in the discussion with dealing with systemic racism in policing. I would like to talk about possibly in terms of law enforcement and public security in general, with some focus on provincial, but also focus on the federal level as well. We have obviously in these days quite a lot of debate about the notion of systemic racism, and I believe that there's some kind of division as to whether it exists, what form it takes. I just like to stress right away that this notion is part of Canadian jurisprudence in case law. Several courts that at different levels have recognized systemic racism. Et je voudrais juste souligner en particulier.
And I would like to point out that even in Quebec, our organization was behind the first ruling on systemic racism in 2013 in racism in the workplace in Montreal. Also in Quebec, there were court rulings related to gender-based racism in the workplace in 2010 with the Gaz Metropolitain ruling. And also we were involved in a ruling on systemic discrimination based on disability. So the Superior Court in 2017 authorized collective action. So we have to start on the premise that systemic discrimination exists, whether it be based on gender or race.
Racism, which is now part of Canadian case law, it's just like denying climate change. It's a fact, it's a question of law as well, and so let's move forward. With regard to policing, I think that one of the issues that we have been involved in, particularly in the last 15 years, is in the area of racial profiling. We have cases before different courts. We help people file complaints with the Human Rights Commission at the provincial level and with the Police Ethics Commissioner at the provincial level as well. And some of the experience that we've had show us that I think there's a lot of action that I think legislators need to look at, all within the context of promoting access to justice for ordinary people who feel that they have been discriminated and profiled by law enforcement officers. What it also, in terms of access to justice, is to ensure that there is effective protection in both the human rights system and in the police complaint system or police ethics system, so that the system really works for people who feel that their rights have been violated. The third part that we have to address is with the Jordan principle, excessive delay in the system, whether in dealing with human rights at any level or at the justice system at any level whatsoever, compromises the notion of effective protection, which is, by the way, a notion that is enshrined in many international instruments on human rights. So I'd like to raise the issue of bringing about systemic changes at the federal level so that we can find ways to ensure people have access to justice and effective protection in dealing with federal law enforcement and public security. Merci beaucoup et nous sommes là pour répondre à vos questions.
Thank you. We'll be pleased to answer your questions.
With that, we'll go to 5-minute rounds. Mr. Motz, Mr. Lightbaum, Madame Michaud, Mr. Harris. Mr. Motz, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your, albeit abbreviated, testimony. Mr. Niemi, I'll start with you. You indicated in your history has been that you've played an advisory role with the RCMP and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. I'm wondering, in that role, given your background in race relations and your advisory work and your advocacy against hate, can you provide advice on whether Canada's RCMP oversight currently is sufficient, in your opinion?
Based on the experience and the knowledge that I have, that we have, thank you, the member, for the question. We believe that that's the structure as it is right now needs some clarification as with regard to its mandate in dealing with race, racism, or discrimination. There's a blurred of with regard to the police misconduct and police, shall we say, standards and norms of practice, and the whole issue of discrimination and human rights. I believe that the present commissioner's office right now is looking into it, and we need more clarification. And we also need, I believe, based on our experience and our knowledge of the system, is a greater outreach and community engagement. My experience with the Canadian Association of Police in the 90s, one reason why police departments and police chiefs are very successful in reaching out to the communities, it takes leadership. It takes proactive leadership to reach out and don't wait for problems to come to your door. Leadership of the person at the top can make a big difference. Our experience with many people from different backgrounds is that people are not against the police. People want to have effective police services, sensitive, accessible, friendly police services, and they're ready to engage, but often there is a great distance between the police department and police leadership and the communities, the ordinary people out there. And that's advice I would like to give to police chiefs and also those who are concerned about promoting positive police community relations.
Thank you very much for that. And I noticed our other witness, Ms. Audette, was shaking in agreement with your statements, and I too would agree with that, given my background in policing. So it would be reasonable. Then we're talking here about this issue with the RCMP. And with the management of the RCMP, they're centralized. They are top-down decision-making processes. Most decisions happen here in Ottawa. They're not local in the community. They move around often. Do you think that, and I would like both of you to answer this, do you think that that reality of where we're at with the current structure of the RCMP contributes and facilitates to some of the racist outcomes that we have in those policing communities?
I would like to defer to my friend, Ms. Odette. Je vous cède la parole.
I give you the floor. Thank you very much. In my opinion, I think that there's goodwill from some individuals within the RCMP, just like in all of the other police corps. But the structures might lead to what we have been denouncing for a long time, that is systemic racism or systemic discrimination. So that's been well proven. And as for feeling comfortable with the RCMP, we have to remember that the RCMP was created to remove children from Aboriginal families, to send them to residential schools. So there's some mistrust. And as you said, there's a top-down attitude. So I agree with Mr. Niemi. We want real police officers. We want men and women who are sensitive so that we're protected, so that they can save our lives. But also, we want to make sure that we feel safe within our communities. And according to me, training that would last only a few hours would not change anything, but we truly have to think about the structure of the RCMP, just like for the Sûreté du Québec and other police corps. So I think that the training has to include the beauty of cultural diversity.
I just have one.
Mr. Motz, you have 8 seconds left, and I'm sure that your colleague will be happy to pick up that 8 seconds. So with that, Mr. Lightbound, 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I'm very pleased to see you again, Ms. Odette. My first question is for you. First of all, thank you for all of your work as a commissioner for the inquiry on murdered Aboriginal men, women and girls. So earlier you said that there are some jurisdictional issue, and you think that there should be a civilian Aboriginal organization that would look at abuses within police corps throughout the country. Can you tell us how it would help? Well, I think it could send two kinds of messages. So we've been hearing testimonies for decades. We feel like police officers are closely knit and they protect one another. But if we were to add a place where people could file a complaint and where people would feel like they were treated seriously or taken seriously, that'd be helpful. And I think that in many societies, that's already done. In Quebec, there is an independent office. It's not perfect, but it's a start. So it's a group with Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people, former police officers. And so that's a good way to make recommendations and improve things. Another question for you. At the end of your speech, you said that the school curriculums should be modernized in order to teach Aboriginal culture. Can you provide us with more details? I've been attending many provincial, territorial, and federal meetings, and everyone agrees to say that history is extremely important. But it seems like, in Quebec, the province is responsible for the education portfolio, but the federal government also has a role to play with the Indian Act. But I don't understand why still today we only teach an inadequate history to our young people. And young people from various backgrounds are telling us we want to understand the Aboriginal history. So I believe that that would be a great tool to fight to dissipate ignorance, because with a better curriculum, we would better understand, and it would provide more pride to our nations because we've been deleted from history. Thank you very much. And my last question is for Mr. Niemi. You've mentioned, rightly so, that we cannot change what we don't recognize, and even less so what we do not know. If we look at the data, where are the biggest shortcomings to fight systemic racism in our institutions? So if we look at complaints that are filed with the Commission on Human Rights or other organizations such as commissioners, well, I have to warn you about something, though. The Quebec Commission on Human Rights that does not have any policy on systemic racism. So when there are complaints that are filed, we don't know how they are being treated. And I believe that we need a framework, or we need guidelines to better deal with those complaints, and then we could better document them. So we've looked at the numbers of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It's difficult to get data on services, but because we know that there's discrimination in the workplace and in other areas. So I believe that the Human Rights Act should be modified, because currently the approach is not very clear for the services. At Section 10, we should have more clarity.
With there, Mr. Lightman. Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses, particularly to Ms. Odette. Thanks for agreeing to come see us. You have a lot of experience, and it will be very useful for the work of our committee. And there's a concept that we haven't mentioned a lot in our study, which is intersectionality.
When I think about Indigenous women in urban environments who are homeless or who might have addictions or mental health issues. So the whole concept of intersectionality is not present enough in policing approaches for Indigenous women in urban settings. So would you have a little bit more to say about that? Yes, of course. And at the same time, we have to understand that for the officers that I do meet, and I have met recently, we often ask them to be superheroes or frontline workers, social workers, addiction specialists. And when for Indigenous populations in urban environments, individuals have very complex social issues, physical and mental health issues. And I can't say that officers, even if we do tell them that's the career you chose, but you need to focus on mental health and social work. It might not be a natural reflex. I'm not saying these people don't have emotions, but the intersectional approach is a very important value. We need to have a holistic approach, and not everybody has that expertise. I'm not afraid when we say that we have to accompany officers with experts to establish trust during those interventions. And that for every actions, if it leads to legal measures, I know that I did my best as an officer to make sure that the Indigenous woman, I gave her all the chances she could get. Thank you. And this came back a few times in the study to accompany, so for social workers to accompany officers. And during further training, is that a possible approach? or post-training? What should be done in your view? Something that's very dear to my heart. The CEGEP in Bécomo has a program in the different regions and Indigenous communities. It's only temporary, but this should be a program throughout Canada to train the next generation of officers. People who work in restaurants or stores say, I know you, I saw you on the television. Thank you. I used to be a police officer at the RCMP, and having worked with communities, I wasn't prepared, and that destroyed me. I'm talking about men in Quebec and Canada who were not prepared for that reality, this very traumatizing reality, but that was very fulfilling at the same time for them. So I would say that for initiatives like the pilot project in CEGEPs, where we could provide Indigenous expertise, remove prejudice, and for people to understand the Blackfoot or Anishinaabe or Blackfoot, so to support them throughout official programs. Thank you. I'd like to know beyond what you talked about with Joyce Echaquan, weren't policing services. It was healthcare, and they're supposed to be there to protect us. For healthcare, we have to trust those institutions as well. I wanted to know, how do we rebuild that trust that was broken in those institutions or that might not have ever been there? I'm thinking about the woman who feels like she has a target on her back since she was young. So how do we reestablish that trust?
That question unanswered for the time being. I'm sure you'll be able to respond. Mr. Harris, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both of the witnesses for your testimony. Ms. Odette, I'm interested in asking you something about the recommendations of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. In particular, I want to just focus on one recommendation which may be helpful to us. It's in section 9.4, you call upon non-Indigenous police services to ensure they have the capacity and resources to protect Indigenous women, girls, and to LGBTQIA people. But it also goes on to say that we further call upon all non-Indigenous police services to establish specialized Indigenous policing units within their services located in cities and regions with Indigenous populations. Now, I'm focusing on that because I think we're looking for ways for policing, particularly in all Indigenous communities, but in urban areas. Is this a potential method for allowing at least a practical start to Indigenous integration in the police service and better serve the huge Indigenous population, or more than half, who are actually in urban areas? Would this work? And secondarily, because I may not have a chance to have a secondary point, is this something, and you have some experience with provincial government in Quebec, is this something that could actually be funded by the government of Canada in terms of its Indigenous mandate, at least support that in non-federal policing? If you have any question on that, please let me know.
I will do my best to respond. I'm a little bit rusted in English, so very French or new my life for the past year. I have
French
to
is
say,
fine.
OK, parfait. Alors, c'est sûr que pour
For us, we're very aware that when we cross Canada, as commissioners, we realize that not all policing has the opportunity to hire Indigenous people and might have challenges when it comes to attract Indigenous people in that area. So we're very aware of that challenge. What I hear and think is that throughout this transition, we have to promote this. We have to make sure that these institutions and work environments can welcome this expertise and wealth. And whether it's one person, several people, elders, front or second line workers, I think that that's absolutely necessary. We have seen success in certain regions where people hire Indigenous expertise to patrol, and that builds trust during interventions. So I would say that that could be a pilot project from the federal with the provinces and communities who would want to participate. And I would suggest that you I would ask you to suggest that.
Moving further, just am I finished, Chair?
No, you got a minute and a half, but Madame
Oh,
Audet has given an excellent example of multitasking.
Wait, grandmother, mom.
Yeah.
Another element of that, since we're looking at but you're talking about transition, but we'd like to make recommendations that can be implemented very quickly, because that will start the ball rolling in some respects. Another one refers to calling out all police services to establish and engage with a civilian Indigenous advisory committee for each police service or police division. Would that be something that could also be done, especially made available to each police service in terms of whatever funding might be required or any initiative that might need to be taken? Because that's something that could start a process of building Indigenous police relationship that's on a more solid footing.
You have about 30 seconds.
If you have the magic stick, the power to do it, do it.
So that's something that you would recommend, that we recommend, I take it.
Yes,
Thank
even
you.
my granddaughter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Couric, you have 4 minutes, and Mr. Motz is 8 seconds.
Thank you very much, and I'll make sure to take full advantage of that extra 8 seconds. Thank you to the witnesses, and thank you to Ms. Adet's granddaughter as well, to adding a little bit of fun here in the midst of what is a very, very serious conversation. And just to note before I get into a couple of questions, resonating with the statement, Ms. Adet, that you made, and I'm paraphrasing, but that training has to be more than simply something that lasts a few hours or simply a handbook. And I would agree there has to be an attitudinal and cultural shift to ensure that these issues are taken seriously. So to you to ask, I'm curious as to your comments on what barriers you see to Indigenous women wanting to be able to get involved and seek positions in policing or other roles that would reduce community violence or barriers to justice.
So in a few seconds, I would say that there are multiple barriers and mistrust where we don't believe or feel that we will be judged if we call the police. So there's a lot of awareness raising and finding places where families have witnessed or testified with former RCMP officers that did their normal work, that followed the whole procedure protocols. And once communication was done between the family and policing services, we could see that there was trust. We could feel that trust. And people are capable of doing that as human beings. So those are examples that are important to develop, but also to accept that we are angry against policing services. There are reasons for that. And once that work is done, different organizations, groups, Mr. Denis can give you examples where we could build together something and reduce those barriers, prejudice against women, to say, well, that we are doing good things. We're doing our job. We're getting better at it. Or we could go in a certain direction a little bit more. We're not giving up. But this work's going to take a long time, and it's important to get it started.
Very much, thank you for that. So So we've heard about the calls to ensure that there's oversight and accountability of police, including the RCMP. So in terms of practically what that looks like, because I think that that part of what this committee is tasked with is not just the overall evaluation of the broader challenges, but certainly my focus, it always comes down to how public policy has practical implications in making life better for Canadians, and in this case, in Indigenous peoples that have had these negative experiences, and in many cases for generations and generations. So I'd ask maybe if I could ask the chair how much time I have left.
You have about 25 seconds.
Oh, well then I'll just go to Mr. Niemi. What practical solutions would you suggest for accountability and oversight?
Well, thank you very much. First thing is basically public and community accountability. I try to be as operational as possible. I believe that police commissioners and leaders should really get out there, meet the community, create structures to give policing back its community-based policing orientation. After 9/11, we have moved away from a community-based policing model, and now we need to go back to that. We need to be police leaders need to know the community leaders and versa. In the 90s,
Okay, we're
that
gonna have
happened and
to,
it helped a lot.
Okay, we're gonna have to leave
Yeah.
it there, unfortunately. Madame Cara, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here and for very important testimonies. Mr. Niemi, perhaps I can start with you. I want to talk a bit about race-based data collection. You've recently said that race-based data collection is instrumental to any campaign or any struggle to combat racial profiling and policing. We know that can be extremely helpful for improving any public accountability and informing public policies. As you may know, over the summer, government announced that Stats Canada will actually now begin to collect data on racial victims of crime and people accused of crime. Perhaps you can touch a bit more on why that's so significant, and if you can talk a bit about any considerations we need to take in collecting that data, how that data will be used, because there are certainly concerns regarding privacy or to see that the data doesn't further tarnish the community or reinforce any racist stereotypes. So if you can shed some light on how we balance that, that could be extremely helpful for the committee.
Thank you very much. With the time that I have, I'll be very short. Data is about science. Data is about quantity and quality. And if we support science, we need data to measure. The same thing to deal with COVID-19 infection fatality rates. We need race-based data. We need race-based data in everything. Even the Commission Vient in Quebec last year also recommended race-based data collection in dealing with Indigenous people. So the Toronto Police Services Board, I believe, has developed a comprehensive, solid model of how to engage in race-based data collection, analysis, communication, and apply to that in translate into measurement of performance, quality, and accountability. So one way to look at just look at the model of Toronto Police Services Board. I believe that there's a lot of things that have been done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we have to go back to the notion that without the data, we are not making sound evidence-based public policy. So data is important, race-based data. If it works with Indigenous people, as so many commissions have recommended, we need race-based data to deal with racialized people and any other demographic factors we deem relevant to better understand the impact of public policy and also to make sure that our public resources, our budgets are well spent.
Thank you, Mr. Niemi. Perhaps I can lead off on the same question. You know, we've recently seen calls to defund the police or defund the RCMP, understanding that that does not equate to canceling the police, but rather reviewing their funding and how it's being used, while also ensuring that we're investing in mental health services, social services, and into our communities. If I may ask you your recommendation on this narrative, and what do you think needs to be done?
Well, I don't think we should talk about defunding of the police for the purpose of what you just mentioned. I think the term can be very loaded. We need to develop a very wise, strategic, cost-effective public policy approach to budget allocation, whether it's for policing, for any other social or even economic programs. We have to look at it. I think the term defunding is seen often to be as an attack on the police profession, attack on the police institution, and an attack on the police officers themselves. The vast majority of them, I believe, are committed to law and order and to serving the public and to protecting the public. So we need to find a different approach and even terminology. And we also have to ensure that I think as legislators and as government, that budgets are well spent and spent in a way that respond to community needs. If there's a gap in funding for mental health or homelessness, can we get the money elsewhere, for example? Can we cut down on this? There are many other things, but just to focus only on the police, I think it can create a lot of confusion and can create a lot of further division, and it does not allow us to really look at the real problem.
Thank you, Madam
Objectively
Carroll.
speaking.
Thank
you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Niemi. Madame Michaud, 1 minute, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to let Ms. Odette respond about how to build confidence in the police. So we have to put people in an environment where they feel safe. And how can we decide how we can work together to address this problem and improve relations? I know that a lot of the relationships have been broken, but we have to identify the problems and we have to decide how we can work differently. And we can do a great deal, I think, with the will to do so. What's the role of the federal government in that? The federal government, of course, the federal government is very important, as well as provinces. And the issue of, for example, the Quebec example is a good one. And the Quebec government and the federal government, perhaps they could consult and exchange information, and in order to increase confidence and trust.
Thank you. That's very, very impressive that you can manage an answer and deal with your child as well. Colleagues, before I ask Mr. Harris for the final minute, you've all been disciplined, as have the witnesses, and we could. The staff tell me that we could do another round, and I'm thinking that maybe a conservative 3 minutes, a liberal 3 minutes, and another 1 minute each for the NDP and conservatives, or NDP and Bloc. Does that meet with your approval for a third round? Okay, well, even if it doesn't, it does. Okay. Mr. Harris, 1 minute, please.
As long as the minutes are as long as the last one, it's okay.
Yes.
Mr. Nomi, you talked about the Jordan's principle as it may apply to civilian oversight and the delay in doing things. The RCMP board, oversight board, has the Colton Bushy case on its books for three years or more. It's now sitting on the commissioner's desk for a long time. It can't seem to get a response. Is that particular problem with the response time from the commissioner, is that something that needs to be fixed in order to provide adequate oversight?
I believe that has to be fixed because when the proceedings or any process goes on more than a year and a half without any results, ordinary people may feel discouraged and they will not come back or they not even come forward the next time around. We need to fast track without compromising the quality and the thoroughness of either the investigation or the complaints handling process. And this is something that all administrative agencies should pay special attention to. Last year, we got 2 of our cases thrown out by the Quebec Human Rights Tribunal, case of racial profiling, because in one case, it took the Human Rights Commission 88 months to investigate and bring the case before the tribunal. And that's absolutely unthinkable in this day and age. And there was a decision last year.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. do my Conservative colleagues have a 3-minute question in them?
Good. So I'll go ahead. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Van Bopta? Okay.
Yes. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Namey, I have a question for you. I understand from your resume that you have extensive experience advising the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and the RCMP. So you would be, I'm assuming, intimately aware of what education goes on in police forces and also in police academies. Maybe you could elaborate on that. We're talking about systemic racism, and we're looking for systemic solutions and perhaps education at police forces.
Well, one of the things that I hear, thank you very much for your question. I hear a lot about training. I think we have to start training at the early level, even before they get to the police department. And we must not forget, you need to train the trainers, because often trainers are behind the time in terms of concepts such as intersectionality, systemic discrimination, merging the notion of human rights in policing. The other thing that I think we have to really focus on is training people is one thing, but you have to make sure that the police departments reflect the people in the community they serve. Employment equity and equitable representation must be the guiding principle for any police organization, especially if it wants to go for a cultural shift in the ways of doing things. And we have moved away from employment equity in police departments for so long. We need to produce the numbers at every level so that men and women or people of different genders of different backgrounds have to be reflected. And when there are more people of diverse backgrounds, we believe that the organization and the culture will shift and shift in the right direction.
Okay, good. Good. Sorry, the time is short. So just a follow-up question. What is your knowledge of the extent, of curriculums at police academies when it comes to race relations? Adequate, inadequate? What would you like to see in our report about that?
Less abstraction, less theory, more direct contact with real people in real scenario in terms of real training in police techniques and technologies. And more importantly, you have to make sure that your cadets, the trainees, reflect the communities in which they're going to serve. Because if you don't have the fair representation, you can train, but if people don't have the direct personal daily contact with people of different backgrounds, we can train people the rest of their lives, but the organization will not shift that culture and bridge the gap, whether it's cultural, it's social, economic, but the gap will always be there.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. Do my Liberal colleagues have a 3-minute question?
I do.
Mr. Yacono.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question s'adresse.
Thank you. For Ms. Odette, recently you said that you saw many online threats against Indigenous women. Could you tell us why that has occurred and what you would suggest to respond to this trend? Well, in September, I received a death threat on social media, on Facebook, and since I'm a representative of the Indigenous women's movement, and I think that we have to educate people on our rights and our struggle. I mean, there are women who have told us that they are often subject to threats and I would say that I think this is something that's quite common across Canada and across groups, and I think we have to denounce this and ensure there's an adequate response. I think that think that when you're faced with this kind of a hate and threat, what can we do? How can we best respond? But we must respond. Thank you, Madame Odette. That's I have no further questions.
Thank you. There's still a minute left if a Liberal wants to pick up a minute. Okay. With that, Madame Michaud, 1 minute, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And maybe a more personal note, Ms. Odette, what are your expectations with regard to the government's response to the report that's been presented to the House? What do you think will be the response of the government to the inquiry? And what can the government do with all these recommendations? Well, I think that we have many groups, and social media are very active, and there's a lot of discussions, and I think this will lead to greater action with the provinces and municipalities, and also the federal government. And I think that in Quebec, for example, I think that the provinces should be required to react, and this would be so transparency and accountability, and I think that would be a good start for Ottawa, and to help promote a mutual understanding.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Final minute to Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Madam Odette, one of the recommendations is to increase the level of Indigenous people in policing, of course. And I'm thinking of Nunavut as a particular problem. You talk about, the recommendation talks about ending the practice of limited duration posts for police officers. It's difficult in Nunavut. RCMP have a short duration. We were told they're now down to 6-week duration because they can't get people to go. And there's a lack of trust in the RCMP, so they can't get recruits. So what do you see, how do you see that working out?
C'est sûr que si le leadership
If the Inuit leadership is active in those discussions, and if they put forward some solutions, and we have to take into account that there's a pandemic going on, but I believe that it will be important to maintain an ongoing dialogue, to not forget the needs. Also, I think that keeping police officers at the same place, well, we know that very few people build their career in the north, and we trust someone, but then overnight we lose that person. And I would say that it's an approach that has not been applauded throughout Canada. So how should we do it? And I know that some Inuit communities talk about community police forces and rangers, and it should be promoted if it's the will.
Mr. Harris, and with that, that brings our time with these two outstanding witnesses to a close. Very useful and very informative, and as you can tell from the intensity of the questions from our colleagues, very engaging. So with that, thank you again for your time, and with subject to whatever eyebrow raising my clerk might put towards me, I'm about to adjourn the meeting. Is that fine, Mr. Clerk? Okay. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Thank you.